I've had the R5 II since August of 2024. When I got it, it was snappy, grabbed autofocus quickly, and then the lens responded immediately. It didn't matter what lens I had on it. But there's something strange that I've noticed this spring. The camera still identifies the target most of the times, but the lens just doesn't seem to respond, or responds slowly. Is my camera faulty, or has the autofocus system gotten worse? Well, I'll break that down for you in just a moment, but if you are serious about staying up to date on the latest camera gear, make sure to subscribe. It helps this channel grow, and it keeps you in the loop. When I got the Canon EOS R5 Mark II on August the 20th, I was taken back to how fast and accurate the autofocus system was, never missing a shot, identifying the target and immediately pulling focus. I even did a video about it, talking about the 100 to 500mm and how fast and snappy the camera was. It was pulling focus. It was doing it so much faster than the Mark I. I was impressed, and I really enjoyed using that camera. But then we entered a long, cold and dark winter, and I really didn't get a chance to use the R5 Mark II other than with the 50mm f1.4 on people. Now, in certain situations there, I also noticed that if the camera had gone to sleep, for example, and I usually set it to go to sleep for about 30 seconds, or after about 30 seconds of non-use, what I would notice is when I woke it up is that sometimes the autofocus system didn't quite function. It was slow, it was sluggish, or the lens wouldn't respond. It was kind of equivalent to an ill-tempered, pissed-off teenager that had been sleeping till 12 o'clock and you woke him up early. But over this weekend, I missed so many shots. Shooting with the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the 100 to 500mm, 100 to 500, firmware 1.1.0, the R5 II 1.0.3. And while the R5 II recognizes the subject most of the times, sometimes the lens would fail to do anything. And sure, I made sure that the autofocus system was set to Atomos just to make sure that everything was in the right direction. I would also change between animal eye detection, or that one setting where it's basically focused on whatever's moving, focused on the animal within the frame. And when that didn't work, I thought, well, okay, I'll set spot or single point autofocus, where you aim at the animal and then it will automatically detect its eyes or the subject depending on what part of the animal it's picking up. And usually that works very, very well. But lately, it just seems to be missing the shot. And I was really frustrated this weekend because there were so many shots I missed. I would hold it on, and it would just, in one case, it wouldn't even pull focus. It recognized the bird, but it would just sit there out of focus, doing nothing, like it was on a coffee break. So I would toggle it off and on again. Still didn't help in this case. It was really stubborn. So I thought, well, okay, so let's point it far away, because sometimes that works. And slowly it pulled the focus, and I brought it back, and it was able to then focus on the narrow. But a lot of strange things I'm noticing here. And again, sometimes I would focus on something close by and then bring it up to where the subject is, or further away, depending on how close I am to the subject. These sort of things would work some of the times. But the problem is when you're sitting there, you're waiting in the blind, you're waiting for that opportunity to strike. It's not like you're shooting ducks or geese where they're so slow moving that if it takes 10, 15 seconds, you're good. But for other birds, I missed so many shots, and I was so frustrated by it. And I came back and I checked to see, okay, the firmware update for the lenses, are they up to the latest? And they were. And the only one thing I could think of, well, there was two things, but the thing that came to mind the most is probably what you're thinking of right now, the firmware update. You see, when I got the camera, it was on firmware, I believe, 1.0.0, and we've had 3 firmware updates since then. Now, while we got 1.0.2, 1.0.3, and I think 1.0.1, it was pretty much wintertime here. Most of the animals had started to migrate, very few were left around, and it just wasn't a great time for shooting wildlife, so I stopped. And honestly, most of the time, I've been shooting with a 50mm f1.4, in the cold, inside, shooting Christmas, shooting my son enjoying some of the many snowstorms that we encountered this winter. There is another possibility, that there's something wrong with my camera, and that's certainly possible. By the time you're watching this video, this camera is already at Canon. Because you see, not because of this, but while I was out shooting B-roll for this, I had a freak accident. So the Ninja 5 normally sits on top of the camera, and I had tightened everything. I checked everything I know about using your checklist and checking. I had tightened it, and then I went to go shoot, and all of a sudden, boom, it fell. And I caught it, but it still bumped into the camera. Now the Ninja doesn't weigh an awful lot, but it must have been just how it hit, because right here on the LCD, there's a little crack, and it's frustrating. Now the crack isn't all the way through the glass, but still, I shoot in a lot of crazy conditions, a lot of very cold climates. I want to make sure my gear is 100%. So I've obviously got some sort of, how shall we say, referring to the body itself. It has a weak spot now because of that damage, and I don't want to be out shooting and all of a sudden that make a certain issue worse. And also, if I'm looking down at the LCD, the very top third of it, it's kind of hard to recognize what's wrong. So I'm sending it off into Canon to have that fixed. Not sure what it's going to cost me, but thankfully I'm CPS Platinum, so I get 30% off, but I get a feeling it's probably going to cost around $500. It's just my feeling. But I'm also telling them, look, I'm having an awful lot of problems with the autofocus system. They did mention to me on the phone, have you checked the firmware updates? Latest firmware on the camera, 1.0.3. Latest firmware update on the 100 to 500, which is 1.1.0, and that goes all the way back to 2021. The 50 millimeter f1.4, that's new, so no firmware update. The 200, 800 millimeter, I checked everything. You know me on this channel. If there's a new firmware update, I'm usually the one to let you know. I'm usually always on the latest firmware update. So I'm really, really frustrated here. I made some notes here. I want to make sure I've got all these covered off. Yes, I don't know. I can't remember if I've already said this already, but when I was shooting over winter with the new firmware updates, 1.0.2, 1.0.1, and 1.0.3, especially when I was out on the ice with my son, I did notice that every now and then the autofocus wouldn't track him, or it was lazy, or it was slow. And at the time I thought, well, it's because when it goes to sleep, it doesn't wake up properly, like that reference to the teenager. But if I turned it off and then on again, everything was fine. And that was with 1.0.2 and 1.0.1, because 1.0.3 is relatively new. I want to be careful what I say here, because I don't want to be hyping things up. But I'm receiving an awful lot of feedback from pros, from people that are doing various sort of safaris or cold weather, Arctic type exploration, shooting all sorts of animals. And what they're telling me is the people that are out there with the R5 Mark II, they're constantly having the camera freeze up. They're having issues with it. They have to pop the battery and then put it back in to fix some of the issues. So I'm getting a sense that even though this camera is now 8 months old, it's still as buggy as all can be. There's an awful lot of bugs in it that need to be worked out. Simple little things. Like I shouldn't be having trouble with the autofocus system at this point. I really shouldn't. And if it is some sort of internal issue, then Canon should be able to identify that and fix it. But still, this is a 5 series camera. It's an expensive camera. It's a pro camera. When I'm out shooting, I expect it to work to its full potential. I don't expect to be having issues with it. And it's really frustrating. That being said, do I regret buying it? No, not at all. I mean, I love this camera. It is a huge update for me over the Mark I. Waveforms. The Canon Log 2, to be able to shoot video, to be able to, the amount of times where shooting with the R5 Mark I, shooting Canon Log 3, I'd get frustrated with it because it just didn't seem to, well, not so much frustrated with it, frustrated with me because I didn't quite get the exposure right and various sundry of reasons. And I won't get into those, but with this camera, the R5 Mark II, I don't have that issue. I'm very happy with it. I'm very excited by it. It's just this spring when I really rely on that bird eye autofocus, that single point autofocus, it just isn't doing the job. And this weekend, it was really, really bad. Anything else? Sorry, I'm still kind of upset. This just happened about an hour or two ago. So I'm still upset over the crack. So I'm a little bit not myself. So let me just see, what else have I trying to say here. So yeah, covered that. Yep. So to sum up then, what I want to say is when I bought the camera, the autofocus, snappy. I mean, the camera would immediately identify the target, and then the lens would just And it seemed like the lens was even quicker with the R5 Mark II than it was with the R5 Mark I. And I shot with it for I don't know how long. Again, I got it in August, then it was September. Once we get into October, we're already in that wildlife is gone. So I'm no longer shooting wildlife. And I didn't get this lens, the 50mm f1.4, till about December the 14th. So I was shooting with a 24-105. I can't recall if I really noticed any issues then. It wasn't until I got the 50mm f1.4. Again, it's a new lens. I'm testing it out. I'm trying it out. And I did notice that I was having an awful lot of problems with the autofocus system there as well, but mostly from when it was going to sleep. So I would just power it on and power it off. And that's how I shot for basically, well, December, January, February, most of March. But then late March and into April, I started going out with the 100 to 500mm, the 200 to 800mm, and of course the 50mm f1.2 a little bit. And that's where I just noticed the autofocus system wasn't where it was. And I'm checking, okay, yeah, I've got it set to Atomos. I've got the right type of autofocus settings set up. And I hadn't changed anything else. So what I'm trying to get at here, and I've taken way too long to get to this point, I really want your feedback from owning the R5 Mark II, not just what you might think of people who own the R5 Mark II, but for those of you that actually have this camera, I want to know what your experience has been with the autofocus system. When did you get it? How is the autofocus system? Have you noticed an improvement with the autofocus with firmware updates, subsequent firmware updates, or have you noticed, like me, that the quality of the autofocus system has actually gotten worse, and to the point where it's worse than where it was with the R5 Mark I. I never had these issues with the R5 Mark I. So yeah, I'm really curious. I guess I'll know pretty soon. By the time you're watching this video, I will have probably received my loaner. So I get a loaner with Canon CPS Platinum. I'll immediately turn it around that same day, send it back to them, so they'll get it this week. They'll probably be able to identify the problem, and I should, assuming that they've got the parts they need, because it's just the top LCD screen here. Assuming that they just need to pop that out, then I probably should get that back sometime mid next week. But if it does take them many, many weeks because they can't get the part, well, I've got a loaner, so that doesn't affect me as much. And I got to remember, one of the things I got to do before I put it in the box is to automatically save the configurations, just in case, so I can load them up in the loaner model. Anyhow, let me know what you think, because I'm really curious. I've been holding off doing this video for a few weeks now, wanting to see if it's something related to what I'm doing, if it's some other potential issue, but this past weekend, it was so bad, so frustrating. And I did have, the problem is I didn't go out there with a Ninja, so I couldn't show you the overlay, showing it that it was locked on, but still not focusing. And my attempt was to go out this morning and do that. And unfortunately, when I damaged this LCD, I decided to pack it in and bring everything in. And of course, everything up to that point had worked. Anyhow, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your support and for watching this video to the very end. Have yourself a great day, a great week, and we'll see you again soon. I got a couple of Pat videos coming out later this week, and they're sure to get your attention. Cheers, folks. Have a good one. It's going in for repair. I'm careful with my gear. Honestly, I am. There's no scratches on this anywhere. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.